Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Dan Tomasulo. We're going to give everybody just a moment to get on, but I'm glad that you're here. And I'm glad that you're here because we're going to talk about hope today. And it's really become my favorite topic these days. And what I'm looking forward to is hearing your questions at the end. This is going to take about an hour. We'll have about 45 minutes of me giving you some material, a knowledge base about hope, some of the new and very exciting research that's gone on, as well as some experiences so that you can learn a bit more about how you might apply this in your life. And then towards the end, we'll have about 15 minutes or so for us to talk about anything that you have on your mind, any questions you'd like answered. So let's do this. Let's get ourselves ready and begin. The first thing about hope is that it is unique among all the positive emotions. It's the only one that requires negativity or uncertainty to be activated. I want you to think about that for a moment. If we have any other positive emotion, something like joy or gratitude, we don't really need anything to activate or stimulate them. But hope lies right in the middle of transformation. It gives us a chance to take things that perhaps are uncomfortable or disagreeable and convert them. And just like the heliotropic nature of flowers, we don't have to learn how to point towards something positive. We're all drawn to it. And what we're trying to do with hope is understand how the negative things in our life can be used, can be applied in such a way that we can learn how to break through the ground. If we were a seed planted in the dark, it would seem like we're lost, we have no place to go. But that seed has an innate intelligence, an understanding that the roots go down and the shoots go up. And once they break through, they naturally head towards the sun. There's a few things that I am sure everybody listening to will understand. And that's that our emotions, thoughts, and our behaviors interact with one another. So if we're upset, as an example, it influences our thoughts and our behaviors. If we're happy, it influences our thoughts and behaviors. But what we're after today is not this kind of ping pong, not this idea that one thing is going to play off and interact with the other. We're interested in what's underneath all of them. And what's underneath all of it is our belief system. It's what we believe, what we expect that influences our behavior, our emotion, and our thought more than anything else. We come into this world with a negativity bias. And there's a good reason for that. We are designed to thrive and to survive. But mostly in the beginning, we are survivors. What we end up doing is worrying about lots of things. Everybody listening to this today comes from ancestors who were born warriors. They had to be to survive. If Jack and Sam are outside the cave and Jack says, "Hey, Sam, I'm going to go inside the cave because I hear some interesting noises." And Jack doesn't come out. Sam's genes get passed on because he worried, right? He said, I'm not going in that cave. I don't like the sound of those things. So embedded in our DNA, embedded in our psyche, is the need to worry and be concerned. And this happens every day. If you were to see somebody help another person cross the street, perhaps an elderly man was being helped by a young woman cross the street, you would notice that. But if two people are raising their voices because they're arguing about something and they're 10 feet away from you, that's going to hijack your thinking. That's a negativity bias, and that's what we're up against when we're trying to take a look at hope. One of the things that happens with a negative emotion is that it restricts us. We have what you've heard of, right? A fight or flight response. But with positive emotions, something very different happens. We build resources. We want to connect and affiliate. It makes us more creative. There's a whole host of things that happen once we get more positive emotions in our life. And not the least of which is our well being, how we'll feel, but it also influences things like our immune system, how well we'll live, how long we'll live. What we're trying to do is apply the science and put the brain at the service of your heart. We're trying to get our thinking capacity, our belief system, to change how our body, our mind, and our heart feel. So we're using the very best of a new science of hope in order to transform our awareness. In order to do that, we have positive interventions. What I mean by positive interventions, very specific things that we're going to do in order to change our awareness. That's going to be important. This isn't just random. This isn't just try to feel better or try to feel happier. This is about having a positive intervention, something very specific in order to improve our mood and our well-being. So why positive interventions? Because not being depressed isn't the same as being happy. The history of psychology has been to ameliorate suffering, and that's a great thing, right? Somebody comes in, they're depressed or they're anxious, and we can help people feel better. That's a good thing. But if you're in a -2 or -3 because you're depressed, and we do our jobs, or what psychology has done in the past, we can bring you back to 0. So you might not be depressed, but we haven't done anything about your happiness. We need a whole different set of tools in order for that to happen. So this is about taking the best of what we've known about how to get people out of a crummy spot, but then adding to it some new tools that can help you thrive, right? And if somebody says they're okay, it doesn't mean you're thriving, right? So it doesn't even have to be about depression. It's about using these particular tools to feel better and to thrive. To improve your positivity, there's a couple of things that you need to do. And this involves us changing our belief system and changing what we pay attention to. So notice what you notice, challenge your beliefs, and hunt the good. We're going to take a moment with these. The first one, notice what you notice. Now, this is really important. If you go into a dark room and you have a flashlight, and you take that flashlight and you point it at the ground and in the corners of the room, and you see perhaps bugs or mice or cracks in the foundation, you're going to be influenced. It's going to shape your mind about what you're attending to. But if you take that same flashlight, you point it onto the wall, and there's a beautiful painting, Picasso, Matisse, some beautiful painting there, it changes your perspective. The point of this is that your experience is what you agree to attend to. So the work in the beginning is how to sharpen your focus. Now, let's take a look at this image. This is a mountain range and a reflection of this mountain range in a lake. Now, if you look at the very top of this mountain range, and if you can see my cursor on the screen, just take a look at the very edge of this mountain range and see if it's accurately reflected in the lake below. Now, as you're looking at that, what I'm going to invite you to do is take your left ear and put it on your left shoulder. Turn your head so that you're looking at your screen where your left ear is on your left shoulder. And what you should see now is an adult, the head of an adult over here in a prayer pose, and the head of a child in prayer pose. And you can see the shoulders of the child and the shoulders of the adult. Now, to me, this is much more than a parlor trick. When I invited you to look at it at a mountain range and lake, you saw a mountain range and a lake. But when I gave you a very slight shift in your perception and asked you to look at it from another point of view, it changed the way you experienced it. The image didn't change one bit, but how you looked at it changed radically. It really depends on what you focus on. If you take a look at this image and you focus on the black features of it, you'll see the word good. But if you were to focus on the white features of it, you will see the word evil. Our capacity for shifting attention becomes a very important way that we can become empowered in seeing the world. We can change our perspective. This here, if you look all the way over on your left and you look at the beak of this duck, you will see a duck pointing slightly upward to the corner of your screen. But if you gaze all the way over to the other end on the far right, what you'll see is that this duck has become a rabbit. If you were to move your eyes back and forth, you'll see that the image, depending on the perspective you choose, can radically change your experience. This is more, I'm using these as a way to illustrate the point, but this is something that can happen all the time. We need to start taking a perspective and challenging it, particularly when there's something negative in our mind's eye. The second thing now is to challenge your beliefs. So let's see what happens here. This is a floating cube. Or is it? Sometimes we have an image of how something is or how we think it is, only to find out that it's really not that way at all. This I found on the internet is a 7th grade science experiment. So something that looks one way and we respond to one way may also need to be challenged. These are paintings, not pillars. We can make mistakes in perception all the time. And in fact, my strong encouragement is whenever there is something rather strong one way or the other, very good or very not so good, is to challenge your perception. This is one of my favorite illusions. I'm going to let this run twice so that you can see how it works. This is not a regular chair. My point with this is to continually challenge your beliefs. Now, I'm a positive psychologist and I'm in the Positive Psychologists Union. We actually don't have a union. That's a bad joke. But if I didn't show this picture, they'd throw me out of the union if we had one. If I were to ask you the question that everybody knows goes with this image, I'd be doing you a profound disservice. Because it makes us think that there's only two answers to this. And the truth of the matter is, this glass is completely full, half with water, half with air. That's actually a more accurate answer. But we have to broaden our way of thinking so that we can start to see things in a different way. Ultimately, what we're doing is trying to give you a way of understanding that there's more than one way to look at something. And ultimately, for you to be able to change back and forth, I'm not inviting people to ignore negative thinking. Negative thinking is really important. If I'm trying to make the the train is coming and the gates are coming down, it's not a good time for me to be optimistic. To be worried would be a very good thing. But when we have a negativity bias, worry can overtake us. And that's where the problem comes in. So what we're after here in studying hope is to be able to look at things in a couple of different ways. To look at it one way, see it one way, understand it one way, and then look at it another. Now, this is a curious image because you haven't seen this before, and yet one of the first things that you'll do, because you've been trained, you've been made aware, you'll probably start to turn your head. That's the whole idea, is that we can train ourselves to start looking at things in a slightly different way so that we can feel a bit more hopeful about a situation that looks rather bleak in one way. If we look at this in one way, it's a bleak, sort of desolate image. But if we look at it another way, we see a work of art. And finally, hunt the good. It's important for us to recognize that even in a difficult situation, there may be opportunities. Wayne Dyer had said this, perhaps in one of the most succinct ways I've ever heard. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It's very powerful, right? And that's what happened as we looked at the mountain and the reflection in the lake. We were able to see it in a different way. And in seeing it a different way, somehow there's change. Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania, somebody I've worked with for the last 10 years, is the father of positive psychology. And he's given us a theory of well-being that's very important. We won't have time today to do all of this, but I do want to focus on the positive emotions today so you can see a little bit how they work and help us in terms of having more hope. When Marty Seligman tried to explain how well-being functions, he realized that it's not enough to just have one arena. Or if you were to ask me, what's the weather like? And I say it's 72 degrees, I'm not giving you enough information. It doesn't tell you if it's raining, doesn't tell you the humidity, doesn't tell us if there's wind. In other words, well-being isn't about any one of these things. It's about the collection of them together. Positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. But today we're going to focus on positive emotions. Now, negative emotions, because of the negativity bias, are stronger. They're more powerful. And that means they're more like pebbles. And when I talk to people about, well, how would you balance out a bunch of pebbles? People say, well, when good things happen in your life. But most of the time, people are talking about some big good thing. Boy, when I get that job, when I get married, when I take that vacation, when I do this, some big thing is going to do it. But if you look at this image, you realize that one great big thing isn't going to balance it out. It's not going to work like this. In fact, what you'll find out is that it works a little bit more like this. You need a lot of feathers to balance out the pebble. And that's the point. What we're trying to do is set it up so that there are lots of little things that you're doing in order to feel better. Not working on just one great big thing that's supposed to balance it, but really a lot of sort of moderate to low level positive things that start to fill up the emotional piggy bank. I don't want to kind of overwhelm you with this, but I do want you to see that this is honestly a science, that there are interventions, positive interventions that have to do with the past. And as you can see here, things like serenity and forgiveness and satisfaction, these are things that have taken place already. In other words, we don't have to go very far if we're thinking about the gratitude we have for things that have already taken place, because they're already in our experience. We don't have to create them. And similarly, we can find out that things like a lack of forgiveness can be jamming us up from having positive emotions. So there are interventions for the past, and we're going to work on the gratitude one today. But what that leads to is being more present, to have what we call dispositional mindfulness, to become more conscious and aware. It's sort of like walking into a dark room and being aware I do have a flashlight. I can focus my attention and I can be aware of what's around me. And then ultimately, this idea about hope is about the future. as is optimism and faith. The idea here is that if we can start with the low-hanging fruit in positive psychology, which is recalling things that we may have skipped over and highlight them, what that does is it gets us ready to be more present in the here and now. And then that ultimately will give us an opportunity to start preparing better for the future. So we're going to try a little exercise. And please, if you have the chance, if you're listening to this and you have access to a phone, a tablet, something, please take part of this exercise. I'm going to take a full minute to do this. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to make a list of everything you did yesterday. And it doesn't have to be in any order, but just make a list of everything that you did and jot it down. And, so I got up, I put my slippers on, whatever it is you did, just write it down. And I'm going to time it right now. So please begin. And again, just let your mind review the day. It doesn't have to be in any kind of an order. And it could be very small, from taking out the garbage to preparing a meal. Jot down everything you can possibly think of. And there's a reason I'm asking you to write it down. So if you have access to a piece of paper or your tablet, jot it down. You've got about 15 seconds left. So again, jot down everything you can think of. Now, in this, right, I'm going to ask you to finish that list, finish the last thing that's on that list, and go to another screen or get another piece of paper. I'm going to do the same thing, but with a different lens. I'm going to give you a minute to look at yesterday through the lens of gratitude and list 3 specific things that happened yesterday that you have gratitude for. And if you would, you can post them in the chat if you're so inclined. And if the chat function isn't working, that's okay, but just to jot them down. Now we've got 3 things, right? So please, as you start doing this, be specific. If it was a nice day, that's good, and you might have gratitude for that. But if it let you take a brief walk outside and you ran into a friend of yours and you had a cup of coffee together, that would be even better because it's more specific. What we learned about gratitude is that specificity is important. And once again, push yourself. You might only have 2, push yourself to get the 3rd. We have about 15 seconds left. And if you would finish that up. Now, what we've just done is we've taken a look at yesterday, but we've looked at it through 2 different lenses. The first one activated what we call the default mode network in your brain. And that brain part just kind of, it's very routine. It kind of just goes through things. There's not a lot of emotion. And in about half the people, what happens is when they go to do the next thing, when they go to look at that day through the lens of gratitude, things come on the gratitude list that weren't even on the first list. You have to think about that. When your brain's in the default mode, it's just going along. It's not really remembering or highlighting anything. You get to specifically review that. And when we change the lens, and I asked you to look at it through the lens of gratitude, things that were already there that may have been overlooked were highlighted, enhanced, brought forward. And isn't that a great way to start retrieving positive emotions? We can harvest feelings that have already taken place simply by highlighting them. Now, the intriguing part about this is this was actually 3 different exercises, right? And a way to understand how gratitude works is that it's not one size fits all. If we had an interactive group today, I would have asked you to share this with somebody, because sharing gratitude is another whole way of doing it. But I want you to think about these 3 types, because they're all different ways of accessing gratitude. The first one is a cognitive one, meaning that you can take your thoughts and you can modify their direction. You can pay attention in a different way. So there's a cognitive strategy for gratitude. The second part was I asked you to write it down. The minute we have to write something down, we are now integrating that feeling into our awareness. If I have this one-off memory, but I don't capture it, it might be very fleeting. But if I capture it and I write it down, what I'm doing really is taking a positive experience and integrating it into my psyche, my mind. And then finally, if I share this with somebody else, there's something synergistic. They call it positivity resonance. It means if I'm sharing good news with you and you're receiving it and you're sharing good news with me, the idea of that interaction enhances our well-being. It creates what's called an upward spiral. If you change your thoughts, you change your world. This goes all the way back to Norman Vincent Peale. So if you change your thoughts and you change your world, we have something here that gives us a type of empowerment. Because when we feel empowered to change the way we're thinking, we can direct that flashlight any way we want. Of course, you can have too much of a good thing, but that's that's a topic for another time. Okay, so a couple of things. People have been asking quite a bit about this. Now, I wrote a book called Learned Hopefulness. It came out in June. And since that time, I obviously did all the research for that book and the prep for that before the pandemic. And when the book came out, it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon for the month of June. And for new release, that's an extraordinary thing. What does that tell us? It tells us that hope has been in very short supply and that people need to have these tools. So I've been asked quite a bit about what can we do now? And I wanted to share these things with you so that you can see a little bit about how this stuff on the past, the present, and the future work together. The first thing is to recalibrate your goals. I call it micro goals in the book, because many of our plans about the future have gotten jostled around. It's very hard now to even plan a month or 2 months ahead because things keep changing because of the pandemic. So part of what will instantly start to help you feel better is to have a micro goal. Meaning, what is it you can get done in the next 20 minutes? Not in the next week or two, but how many emails can you answer in the next 20 minutes? Can I get these 3 emails answered then? If you're preparing a meal is a beautiful way to get focused in the present, right? You start having a micro goal about chopping the carrots for your soup, putting the water on, slightly planning ahead, anything that keeps your goal within a short-term vision where you can see it coming. You have a sense that this can be completed. It could be as small as cleaning out a closet, preparing a meal, sweeping the floor. These are not big things, and that's the point. What we need are very small feathers to tip that scale. Big things, big payoffs, they're not going to be very helpful right now because they need a lot of time and a lot of planning. What we need is during the day. I probably have 40 or 50 micro goals during the day. I have a half hour. Can I get this, and this done? I've got 10 minutes. Can I get that done and this done? What this does is it brings me into the moment in a different way, and it allows me to embrace a goal that then I feel good about. One of the things about hope is that it's bi-directional. What I mean by bi-directional is that if I just have a little bit of a spark, like I think I could get this done in the next 20 minutes, right? That positive or good feeling gives me just enough motivation. And it does that because it changes my belief system. When my belief system changes so that my expectation of what I can get done in the future is shifted just slightly, what that does is it gives me enough energy to change my behavior, right? And that changes my thoughts, changes my feeling, it changes things. And then when I accomplish a goal, it's bi-directional because accomplishing that goal gives me immediate feedback that I did good. This feels good to get even this small thing accomplished. And when that does, that goes back in and gives me more positive emotion in order to do something else. The second thing has to do with the past and present. You've just proven to yourself that by putting on the lens of gratitude, you get to see things in a different way. And when you see things in a different way, experiences that you may have not noticed or may have been eclipsed by negative experiences are highlighted. I was a trauma researcher and clinician for about 20 years before I became a positive psychologist. And everything I know about trauma was now enhanced by us helping people understand that even though they've gone through a really difficult and horrible thing, that there were also good things happening in and around it. We often don't acknowledge or recognize those things. But when we can highlight them in some way through gratitude, we can enhance them and then bring them forward. Um, Also, if we're focusing on the moment, if we're going to um, look at the best bang you can get for the buck, it's being kind to other people. I was at a meeting with about 2,000 psychologists, and we were with Marty Seligman back at the International Positive Psychology Association when it was first starting up. And somebody asked him, you know, you're like the world's expert on this. What's the one thing that you can do to get out of your depression, to get out? And Marty never missed a beat. He said instantly, do something kind for someone else. The minute you do something kind for someone else, we have a phenomenon that occurs called elevation. That's a cool piece of science because not only are we wired, right, for the negativity bias, we're wired to notice something beautiful in the world when we watch people interact and do kind things. Hasn't this happened for you? You see somebody do something kind for someone else, and it's like, oh my goodness, that really warms you up. So in elevation, if I do something kind for someone else, I'm going to feel good. They're going to feel good. But the kicker is anybody who witnesses or hears of it is going to feel good. There's something called vagal tone. There's a vagus nerve that goes basically from our heart to our brain. And that's how scientists measure our capacity for well-being. It's one of the ways that they measure it. And when kindness is acted on or witnessed, one of the things that changes is our biochemistry. We change how we are in the world when we do something kind or we notice something kind. And finally, the last thing here is to cherish relationships. It's pretty simple stuff. If I want to know how well you're going to live and how long you are going to live, all I really have to do is look at the quality of your relationships. Um, it's almost a direct correlation. If your relationships are good, if everything that's happening in your life has to do with good family, good friends, and working on good relationships, what we know is that that's going to change your immune system and it's going to help you live a longer and happier life. I live down at the Jersey Shore, and what I can invite you to now is to always feel surprised by hope. Hope is something that can be available. We just have to look for it and to acknowledge it when it happens. I often ask my students to spend a day going through and do 5 acts of kindness, right? So that they're constantly looking for ways to be kind, right? I'm going to shift here a little bit just so that we can understand a bit more about the science, right? Because in what we know about people who know how to look for hope, who are waiting to be surprised by it, is that we tend to have 2 groups of people, right? People who have low hope, people who are limited in their hope capacity, and people who have high hope. And it seems that the people who have high hope are people who are making decisions that are very, very different. Instead of being fixed, they see possibilities. Instead of focusing on the negative, they're noticing beauty, benefits, and blessings. Instead of cultivating habits of negativity, always looking at what's wrong and repeating it or pointing it out, they cultivate positive feelings. What is it that I can do to make this situation is a driving force in their life, right? They're looking for cultivating something positive. Instead of focusing on weaknesses, they focus on strengths. They focus on what it is that they can bring to the situation that's unique, and they help harvest those unique strengths from other people. It's something called strength spotting. We also have people not challenging themselves when they have a very limited sense of hope, right? And people who are high hope folks are constantly choosing goals to engage them, and they're challenging, right? They also have a strong sense of purpose. And as I mentioned before, they're very much invested in cherishing others. When we have this kind of thing, let me leave this here. When we have this kind of thing, one of the things we know is that high hope people are regularly engaged in this. There is an ongoing investment in trying to find small things that will boost their positivity, create changes in the world that support their belief system. I'm going to stop here and turn it over to questions and answers. And I think the way that this works is I'm going to stop this sharing here. Okay. And I'm going to go to the questions and answers. So I'm going to read them. I haven't read them before. So, hi, Daniel. This is absolutely fascinating. Would it be at all possible to receive a recording of this webinar? I missed the first 10 minutes and will have to miss the last half. Well, Jen's not here, but I do think that that's the purpose of today, that I'm going to be able to offer this. I know that the sponsoring agency here is going to offer it. Next one, great talk, Dan. Is learned hopefulness specifically for an audience dealing with depression, or can it also be for the general population of folks who just want to increase their overall happiness? It is for a general population. Although I target depression as something specific, particularly for people who are sort of stuck and they're having some difficulty getting out of a depression. The truth of the matter is it becomes a host of tools so that you can keep from getting, it's more of a preventative measure. So something like that is certainly possible. And the way that this has has evolved is that people have been using it in order to feel better. People are drawn to this learned hopefulness. They're drawn to the learned hopefulness as a way of sort of getting out of a crummy mood. But much more importantly, it's about staying out and then thriving. The idea about generating systematically ways for us to feel better. And again, not ignoring the negative. Negative has its place, but to find ways to keep moving yourself out of it. So yes, for the general population. And I also have something called the 21-Day Hope Challenge, but you can email me through the website, dantomasulo.com, and I can tell you more about it. But there's a lot of different interventions. And once you learn how to use them, it's like having a really cool toolbox with a lot of tools that you can use. So thanks, Ali. Great answer. Next one. Thank you very much, Daniel. This is wonderful. Oh, terrific. I'm glad that you like it. How would you distinguish between hope and faith? Oh, what a great question. Hope I have a great answer for it. Let me just say that I know in popular vernacular that those two things, and I do it too, I kind of mish them together, hope and faith. But I have some images where I was invited in New York City to speak at St. Patrick's Cathedral when the book was coming out, which was really a powerful time to talk about the difference between hope and faith. And a way to understand it is that hope is what I can expect to influence on the future. Like, in other words, my expectation, my belief system about how much influence or effect I can have on the future is what we call hope. Faith is when something else is going to influence that future. So I'd say, geez, I hope I pass the test. Well, that's not really hope as the scientists define it. It's like, I'm going to do something about that test. There was a famous pitcher named Catfish Hunter, and when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he talked about all the things he did to get ready. And he said, I work out my arm, and I work out in the off season, and I do all this kind of stuff. And when I do that, I try to get different weather, and I did that. And he said, but at some point, I have to let go of the ball, and then I don't have any control over it. So that's really how we define it, that between what we believe we have control over, and then when we pass that could be anything, could be science, could be a higher power, could be God, could be faith, could be the universe. Something else is what's often involved when we talk about faith. Thank you. That's a great question. Let's see, the next one, to cultivate positivity, do you have more ways on how to reach that positive thinking? I certainly do. Just imagine, I'm the academic director at the Spirituality Mind Body Institute at Columbia. So I've designed lots of courses. We have 45 hours of class time. I've designed certificate programs, undergraduate classes. So what I'm saying is that there's lots and lots of ways. Today, I wanted to introduce you to a couple, right? So the gratitude one, the kindness one, and the idea about micro goals. These are all ways to do it. And one of the things that I would say is that, of course, in Learned Hopefulness, not trying to plug the book, but there's a collection of these. Having a dialogue with your future self is a great way to start moving forward in terms of expectations. If you go on my website, I have a 2-minute video designed just for cultivating self-compassion. This is a very brief exercise where you have an encounter with an empty chair about all the best parts of you like as if you were talking to that part of you that has nothing. Like it's as if a good friend, a really your best friend, is living inside of you, right? And you have a dialogue with that part of you, and you literally reverse roles. We use something called embodied cognition, which basically means as you sit in the other side and become that part of you that sees you as a really good friend with a good friend would, you would then integrate these feelings. So there's lots of techniques available, and certainly you're welcome to email me. And again, certainly in Learned Hopefulness. But the idea is you start with a quest. What else can I do? Right? Terrific question. Um, what are some of the specific examples of creating hope, like the good deeds example? Okay, a way to think about this is, and again, terrific questions. What you're doing is you're trying to understand that hope is something that you can provide for other people if you know how to transform it yourself. So let me offer at least one way of thinking about this, right? Um, uh, if somebody comes to me and they're in a lot of pain, it's like they're coming to me with a huge tablespoonful of salt. And if they come to me with that salt, and I can't, because I'm not in a good place, right? It's like I have a 6 ounce cup of water, and they're going to put all of that salt in my 6 ounce cup of water. I'm going to feel bad too. So, one of the ways that we can help when people are in a bad space, or even ourselves, is imagine that that tablespoon of salt is going into a lake. You become more gracious, more open. That's why I often start with self-compassion, to help people cultivate this aspect of themselves. Because if you know how to take good care of you, then that's nurturing this positive sort of wellspring inside of you that then allows you to radiate that out and help others. So the things that I would say is to cultivate self-compassion for you. And again, on the website, there's a free exercise there. Um, and the other thing is that when you're able to be compassionate with yourself, extend that compassion to others whenever you can. Again, great question. Next one from Christina. What are your thoughts on meditation and hopefulness? Well, you hit right on my next thing. If we were doing this a little bit longer, I teach a class where we have a whole section on the different kinds of meditation. One of the things that's happened is that, you know, meditation kind of gets lumped together as if it all does the same thing. Well, it's not really like that at all. There are different kinds of meditation. So let me talk about two that might give you some ideas. The first one I mentioned earlier, called dispositional mindfulness, which is really basically taking stock. It's noticing what you notice. It's catch yourself thinking. It's developing a consciousness about your thoughts and feelings, where there's a you, a true self, or as Deepak calls it, Deepak Chopra calls it the non-local self. There's a capacity for you to witness your thoughts and feelings. And when you can do that as you're having your moment, I'm always trying to do that, to be me and be here at the same time. Dispositional mindfulness gives us a way of embracing the moment, but doing it as if we're witnessing what's happening. And this gives us a lot of choice. It also gives us pause for thought. And there's a whole bunch of research. We didn't do a lot of research today, but it's a whole bunch of research that when I can simply take stock of what am I experiencing, that's all, just noticing what I'm noticing. Two of the most important things, hope and perseverance, naturally rise up inside of us. In other words, Those things happen spontaneously because it's a form of self-regulation. When we can self-regulate, what it means is we have the keys to the kingdom, right? Because when we know that we can shift our thoughts, we can, it's our thoughts are like the front wheels of a car. We point them this way, they'll go that way. What meditation does is lets us know that we have hold of the steering wheel. The second kind of meditation I'll mention is one that I'm actually in the middle of doing some research on now, called Tonglen meditation, which is very, very different. You know, if we do a loving kindness meditation, we're filling ourselves up with a lot of positive emotions first. If we do a mindfulness meditation, we're getting to witness or observe our thoughts. But if we're doing Tonglen, we're actually learning how to convert negative emotions into something that's transformative and transcendent. And I've become fascinated with that. There's a bunch of other meditations, Feeding Your Demons, a bunch of really cool ones that I like because they help to transform negative emotions into something more positive. And as the Buddhist saying goes, no mud, no lotus. Thanks for that. Um, Another person here. Hi, Daniel. Great insights. Thank you. How can we help people be more positive and grateful towards life? Well, again, what a terrific question. We can do that for others by being an exemplar. Um, you know, my day is filled with meeting and connecting with people, working on projects and doing a whole host of different things. And what I know is that I have to take exquisitely good care of myself so that I'm in a good place, because it doesn't matter what profession you're in, and we've studied this, right? Everything from investment bankers through surgeons, through lawyers. If you're in a good place, almost everything else you do is going to improve. But it also helps you look at life through the lens of what's possible. I train a lot of therapists, and I supervise students who are trying to become therapists. And one of the things that's happened is that I teach them how to look for a person's strengths. We go through a typical protocol of how psychology in the past might have looked at somebody's story, and then we go through the same story, but we listen differently. People will tell you the things that are inspiring to them or good, but the negative stuff covers it over. When you're an exemplar and you're in a good place, you're in a place where you can help spot all of those elements in others. I'm going to make a pitch here for a great organization called VIAcharacter.org, VIAcharacter.org. And over 11 million people have gone there. And if you want to learn about your top character strengths, what are called your signature strengths, that is maybe the best, most radical shift in psychology that the science has ever seen. Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson were involved in developing that scale, and 11 million people are using it. Something is happening. There's a phenomenon around it. And what it does is it tells you what your top strengths are. And I didn't put much stock in it when I first took it until I realized what happened. When you learn, like my top strengths are creativity, love of learning, perspective, humor. You might not know that from the bad joke before, but So what happens is if I stop worrying about how to be, and I just rely on these top strengths, and I come into any situation and I know I have to use them in the right dosage, well, what happens is I become an exemplar for these positive elements. And then I can start to spot them in others when they're using it. Again, this isn't about research, but a lot of the folks that I've worked with that have multiple dilemmas, intellectually, psychiatrically disabled. We've used this particular technique and it's been very effective. Instead of seeing the pathology, the negative stuff, to see what they're bringing, what their strengths are, and highlight those. Um, so I hope that, this is a great question. Do you have advice on positive psychology during job interviews? Well, I'd say that the real positive psychology um, happens before the interview. I would do a heck of a lot of role playing and play a lot of the other role, sit in the other chair as the interviewer, and look over there and see that person as if you were seeing that person's full potential. Because when you're on an interview, the idea is to sell your strengths. And not to hide or minimize your weakness. I think it was Peter Drucker who said, we want to make our weaknesses such that our strengths are so great that people don't even notice the weaknesses because they're looking at that. So it's a matter of going in with a degree of assurance and awareness that I've got something to offer that's going to make us both better, right? Again, quite a great question. Um, is there a downside to hope? Terrific question, such as disappointment. And if so, how can we mitigate it? Wow, wonderful question. A way to understand that um, is that, as I mentioned right in the beginning, hope is the only positive emotion that requires negativity or uncertainty in order to be activated. So disappointment is actually part of the raw material for the activation of hope. So the first thing when disappointment happens, it's called an incipient moment. In Mandarin, the symbols for a crisis are opportunity and danger, right? And the difference between these two things, opportunity and danger, is that there's an incipient moment. And what that means is, okay, I'm disappointed this didn't work out, right? Now, that doesn't mean you just try to jump to all good things. You sit with that disappointment and you grieve. You don't push it away. You become that lake for that tablespoon of salt. And when you can do that, it doesn't push it away, but it allows you to sit with it long enough that it doesn't become such a threat. It's our threat response. What we know from the discovery of telomeres, right? That our thoughts are directly connected to each one of our cells. Those are the things that'll unravel ourselves. So when you have a disappointment, you don't push it away. You sit with it until you understand it, right? And then the incipient moment is, okay, what's another way that I can look at this? That's usually a phrase that I really try to have people cultivate. Not to ignore the disappointment, but to ask yourself, what's another way I can look at this? And just doing that starts your brain moving in a different direction. There's another way to see this. I might not know what that is, but it starts changing that awareness. Um, so thank you again. It looks like it's called Tonglen. Somebody's asking what the name of the meditation is. Tonglen. Tonglon. It's spelled different ways. I've seen it in different ways. It's very, very, very interesting. And one of the things that we're doing now is we're putting together a pilot program of learning how to use a very rapid form of this meditation in order to alleviate anxiety and depression. Okay. I think that brings us to the end. I want to, we're down to the last 30 seconds or so. I want to thank you very, very, very much. I realize I might not have gotten to all the questions, but please feel free to email me through the website, dantomasulo.com. And I really appreciate you inviting me here. Thank you very much.